Welcome back, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Good.
I'm
That's
doing good.
So we're going to look at symptoms of test anxiety. Physical symptoms can be, headaches, feeling lightheaded, feeling fever can occur. Test anxiety can also lead to like panic attacks. How many of you have experienced a panic attack?
Me.
Yeah, me too. Personally, I experienced one, I think, a couple of days ago, and it was not fun. But it's an abrupt onset of intense fear or discomfort in which individuals feel like they are unable to breathe or having a heart attack. Emotional symptoms, feeling anger, fear, helplessness, and disappointment, or other fears or other emotional responses to test anxiety. Behavioral and cognitive symptoms are difficulty thinking um, negative about the test. Those are the common symptoms of test anxiety. Triggers of test anxiety can come from a feeling of lack of control. Test anxiety can be caused by a teacher embarrassing a student. Being placed into a course above your ability can also cause test anxiety. Test anxiety is from fear, maybe because poor grades parents getting poor grades, which can make your parents and family and friends kind of upset. And I know at one point I experienced that too. Tips for managing test anxiety, though: being prepared, developing a good testing skills, maintaining a positive attitude, and staying focused. Practicing techniques, staying healthy, and visiting the counseling center can also all be good tips for managing test anxiety. I know on the screen for me, when I deal with test anxiety, or when most kids deal with test anxiety, it's often visiting counseling centers or maintaining a positive attitude. And I know that can be hard too, but maintaining a positive attitude is really key in dealing with test anxiety. So we're going to do an exercise real quick. There's going to be 3 questions that I'm going to ask you guys. And you can write them down. You can think of them in your head. But we're going to share some of our answers. You don't have to share, but we're going to just share these 3 questions. What brings you the most test anxiety? What brings you the less test anxiety? And what are some of the things you do to cope with managing your anxiety? And I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to write that down, and then we'll discuss them. You can also put them in the chat box too if you don't feel as comfortable saying them out loud. So while you guys are writing those down, I'm just going to share a few of mine. What brings you the most test anxiety? I think the thing that brings me most test anxiety is when I'm in a room filled with a whole bunch of people and I feel like they know the answer and I don't. So that brings me a little test anxiety, and it makes me feel overwhelmed. My head feels hot. I have headaches, kind of like the symptoms we talked about before. What brings you less test anxiety? I think brings me less test anxiety is kind of like when I'm in my own room, like when I'm in a room far from people, when I have time to kind of think about my answer. What are some of the things you can do to cope with managing your test anxiety? I think some of the things I do to deal with my test anxiety is to have quotes or write positive things on my maybe paper before I start the test, or on the test or stuff like that. Does anybody want to go first to share, or does anybody want to share what they
I can.
Okay, thank you, Taylor.
So to the first question, what brings you the most test anxiety? I'll have to say quizzes with the short answers or question responses. I think those bring out my test anxiety because I have to write, and writing is not my best subject. And then just trying to figure out what words to say and trying to make sure it sounds good too. I think that brings out my test anxiety along with the writing part of it. What brings you less test anxiety? I think tests with just multiple choice answers, like when you have A, B, or C, and D. I think those help me a little bit more just because I have time to like eliminate which two answers don't sound like they'll be the right ones, and then what are some of the things you do to cope with managing your test anxiety. I'll say I listen to music before I take the test. I like to pick out a few songs before and just listen to those. Or before I take the test, I go over the notes in a quiet area away from people and just sit there and refresh my brain. And then if I'm taking a test and I'm still also nervous, then I just take a break from the test real quick and tell myself I'm okay, just so I can relax. But I think those are the answers to the questions.
Well, thank you for sharing so much. I think that was very, helpful to everybody. I think those are some good answers. And thank you so much again for sharing. I really appreciate it. Does anybody else have anything they would like to share?
I can go ahead and share.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Miss Nicole, sorry.
So the first question says, what brings you the most test anxiety? For me, in times like we are now with COVID and everything, what brings me the most test anxiety is seeing that little time at the top of your screen that says, you have 5 minutes remaining. That makes me more nervous than anything. Then what brings me the less test anxiety is when the professor says, oh, your test is not timed, you can take it on your own time. That just calms down a lot of nerves. And then the final question says, what are some of the things you do to cope with managing your test anxiety? Well, for my test anxiety, I have to take a deep breath and tell myself I can do this. So I just calm my nerves is my main thing I have to do before I take a test.
Thank you so much, Nicole, Miss Nicole, for sharing. I really appreciate it. Those are really great points. Let me see if anybody put anything in the chat box. Ashley said fear of failure brings out my test anxiety. I can totally relate to that. When I know the material well and I know that I've studied as much as I can, it brings me less test anxiety. Staying positive and telling myself that I will get through the test helps me cope with managing my anxiety. Yes, I feel the one about failure, fear of failure. Yes, that's a huge one. So in conclusion, I think that we brought up some great examples, discussed some great examples on how we can manage test anxiety. Remember that there is symptoms with test anxiety. There is ways and tips on how to manage test anxiety. There's also going to be triggers of how people have test anxiety. We will always make sure that, with test anxiety, we look at the different ways we can better this difficult, challenge with our students and with the students. Once again, I just want to share some of the highlights from the PowerPoints when maintaining, positive attitude and making sure we stay healthy and stuff like that. Staying healthy with test anxiety too is a huge one. Like I said, those are all, the ways of test anxiety. People deal with it. Thank you guys so much for attending this educational session, discussing ways to manage your, test anxiety within students. Thank you guys for sharing you guys' responses to the activities we have done. And if you guys have any questions, don't be afraid to email me at jordan.white@berkshire.edu after this session is over. And does anybody else have any points or anything else they want to share before we end this session?
I have a question.
Yes.
So do you think in times of the pandemic with COVID-19 that professors should give tests, or do you think that they shouldn't? Because I feel like with professors giving us tests during times like this, I feel like our test anxiety just goes way up.
I think that is a great point. I'm not sure, 100% sure on how, they should go about tests, but I do think they should look and remember that we are in a pandemic and that, it is harder for students to, have some of the same resources other students have. But it is a great point that is up for discussion, and I appreciate you sharing that. Does anybody else have any more questions?
I would just say I think we should just get a little bit more time on the test just because of the pandemic.
Well,
I think it's the 15 minutes, like if you had to do like a whole bunch of questions and you have like 15 minutes, I just don't think 15 minutes is enough time to really have time to focus on the test. So maybe if we can, like, the teacher could extend the test, that probably would help people with their test anxiety right now with Corona.
well, I can definitely put that in my notes, and I can definitely share some of our concerns with someone higher, and we can go about ways we can fix this problem. Does anybody else have any more questions before we end this session? Well, once again, thank you guys for coming to the session. Here's the references to all the material, and if you need, if you want to have something from the material, or you want to, make sure that I didn't miss anything, or I missed something on your part, just feel free to email me at jordan.white@brusher.edu. Once again, thank you guys so much for showing up to this session about managing test anxiety. And once again, there is drinks and snacks in the break room when you guys leave. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it.